of cryptocurrencies generally, I can say almost with certainty that they will come to a bad ending.
As crypto is a $2 trillion asset class, are you willing to admit you missed something?
I'm proud of the fact I've avoided it. I wish it had been banned immediately. And I admire the Chinese for banning it. I think they were right and we've been wrong to allow it.
What I can say is that Tesla, Apple, and Google all have the same problem. They're sitting on huge piles of cash and they're dissipating shareholder wealth at a rate of 15 to 20% a year times that cash. They need to turn that from a liability into an asset. And the best way to do it is convert it into Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's going up more than 100% a year. Cash is debasing at 15% a year.
Most people don't understand Bitcoin, and some people say it's a scam, while others say it's going to be one of the biggest things in the future, or that it's going to make us question what money really is.
This could be kind of a big deal. Yeah, it could be a big deal, and if you see Bitcoin prices, certainly the market thinks it is. If you take a look, you have a more than 9% jump in Bitcoin over the last 24 hours.
There's only so much news in the media that you can watch before you start to ask, what exactly is going on in this world? And why is everyone talking about Bitcoin? And the more I tried to figure out how to answer that question, the more I became interested in Bitcoin and the ongoing sensation it has become. Consider the fact that its creator, an individual or a group of individuals using the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto, remains anonymous to this day. Nakamoto is reported to own 1 million bitcoins. That's over $45 billion in value. In theory, if the price of a single bitcoin reaches $200,000, Nakamoto would become the world's wealthiest person if he sold his bitcoin. But Nakamoto is only one aspect of what makes this ongoing saga so fascinating. The truth is, it's a wild world out there, and I believe it's time for us to finally take a step into the world of cryptocurrency and begin to understand it. Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Litecoin, and NFTs are all cryptocurrencies right now, but what does it all mean? Bitcoin is an interesting story. It's a story about the single biggest thing that influences each and every life today. The piece of paper that we call money, or the numbers you see on the screen in your bank account. But if you rewind time far enough, barter system was used for centuries, long before money was invented. People exchanged goods for other goods in return. If you have ever swapped one of your toys with a friend in return for one of their toys, you have bartered. Bartering is trading services or goods with another person when there is no money involved. The other person does not have any proof or certification that they are legitimate, and there is no consumer protection or warranty involved. That's a complication in bartering. Then thousands of years later, countries started using paper money that was backed by gold. In other words, the paper dollar would be backed by a certain amount of gold and you could exchange those dollars for physical gold that each country held in its reserves. This system was known as the gold standard.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
Slowly, the United States left the gold standard in 1971. Then banks established control over the system, and as a result, we no longer needed to carry precious gold. Instead, everyone switched to paper money. For example, the $10 note in the United States is only worth $10 because the government says so. This type of money, the money we use today, which is no longer backed up by gold, but rather our faith in government, is known as fiat money. There are arguments for and against fiat money. This gave governments and central banks more control over money supply, making it easier to use monetary policy to respond to financial crises. But the important thing to remember here is that this system relies on trust in government. But there were people who did not trust the government. Those people were cypherpunks. The cypherpunks emerged in the late 1980s as part of a movement that was opposed to centralized authorities, such as governments being able to spy on people or have access to their information. They advocated for what is known as cryptography, which is ways in which we can secure communication in the presence of third parties, typically through the use of encryption. Cypherpunks recognize the glaring conflict between their libertarian beliefs and the prevailing financial system. When people say banks or central banks, they talk about centralized entities with the ability to create as much money as they wished on their own terms. We, the people, believe that our financial institutions are a secure place to store our money and that they'll not mismanage it or eventually fail. Cypherpunks, however, did not believe so.
What we know now is Wall Street can bring down Main Street.
This is the story of the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history, and a chapter that changed our country. It led to an age of populism, a deep distrust of Wall Street, and a near meltdown of the global economy.
Not in generations has Wall Street absorbed the number of body blows it took today.
The American financial system is rocked to its foundation as top Wall Street institutions topple under a mountain of debt.
It was an historic day with Wall Street shaken to its very foundation today.
The losses staggering, the fear climbing.
It was a wake-up call, exposing risky banking practices. Many people lost everything, including their faith in the financial system.
Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed. We are in the midst of a serious financial crisis.
It's no accident that during the height of the 2008 financial crisis, a white paper on Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, began to circulate on a cryptography mailing list. Nakamoto created what we now know as blockchain technology. To put it another way, he created a mathematical, computer science, and cryptography framework for a currency. Bitcoin sought to address the issue of trust by providing a medium of exchange that did not rely on a central authority. Rather than relying on a centralized authority to conduct financial transactions, Nakamoto built on the previous work of cypherpunks. Now that we have discussed the motives behind Bitcoin, let's stop for a second and figure out What precisely is Bitcoin? And how is it decentralized? Bitcoin is a digital currency, not a real coin. For instance, consider the following. Let's say John pays 4 Bitcoins to Jessica, and Jessica pays 4 Bitcoins to Thomas. Both these transactions are recorded on a sheet called ledger. Every transaction that comes thereafter is also recorded on the ledger. All the banks work in a similar fashion. They record all the transactions made through a bank account using their own software. They ensure that all the transactions are valid. A bank has the systems in place to make sure that somebody with only $1,000 in his account cannot spend more than that. Bitcoin, however, is intended to be decentralized. So how could it possibly verify that John even has 4 Bitcoins to send to Jessica in the first place? Instead of a central authority owning the ledger that records all Bitcoin transactions, the ledger is instead distributed amongst all the other computers or nodes in the Bitcoin network. A network that anyone with a computer can join simply by downloading the Bitcoin software. Now, each time a transaction is made on the ledger, every computer on the network will attempt to verify whether this transaction is legitimate by solving complex problems. When a consensus is reached on the network and the transaction is valid, it will be permanently stored on the ledger, and after a certain amount of transactions are made on the ledger, a new ledger is created that contains a type of code otherwise called a hash that links back to the previous ledger. This is why we call it a blockchain. Each of these ledgers or blocks contain a certain amount of transactions that are then linked to the previous block in the chain. Each block contains transaction data such as who was paid and how much, a unique identifier called hash, and the last transaction that was recorded in the sequence or the previous block. Because each of the billions of computers in the blockchain network has its own copy of the ledger, if I wanted to fraudulently create a transaction that said, paid me X amount of money, I would have to do it on at least 1 million of them, which means that the vast majority of computers in the system would also be compromised. Trying to hack into 1 million unrelated machines at once is a lot more difficult than simply gaining access to someone's dollar account and giving myself money, which is something that has been done before and is as simple as guessing someone's 6-digit PIN. In other words, it's a decentralized form of currency that does not rely on trust between parties for transactions to happen. You can still find the very first block on the Bitcoin blockchain today, mined by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009, showing that Nakamoto was given a total of 50 Bitcoins as a reward for mining the first block. This block is commonly referred to as the Genesis block. Nakamoto had also set the supply limit for Bitcoins as 21 million within the software code itself. Mining will continue until there are 21 million Bitcoins in existence. That is said to happen around the year 2140, if Bitcoin lasts that long. Blockchain is a common example of cryptography in use, and many popular cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin use it. However, there is a common misunderstanding that blockchain represents Bitcoin or acts as a currency in itself. Blockchain does not represent Bitcoin or act as a currency in itself. Now, if you're enjoying this video, then a subscription to the channel would make me feel just amazing. Until 2010, Bitcoin was worth practically nothing. Yet, that would soon change that year. During the month of May, a man named Laszlo Hornitz created a post on a Bitcoin discussion forum offering to pay 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 large pizzas. 2 days later, Laszlo reported that he had successfully traded his Bitcoin for $25 worth of pizza. This was the very first recorded transaction in which Bitcoin was used to purchase a tangible item. And just like that, the digital currency took its first big step in becoming recognized as having value. The 22nd of May was officially dubbed Bitcoin Pizza Day. By the end of 2010, Bitcoin had gone from being worth nothing to 39 cents. In 2011, Bitcoin reached a price of $1, and suddenly we began seeing the emergence of other cryptocurrencies, many others such as Ethereum, Dogecoin, Litecoin, and many more. They all use the very same blockchain technology that Bitcoin uses. They are also known as altcoins. Bitcoin struggled in its early years from a poor reputation and multiple scandals. Its use of a private and a public key system allowed for a level of anonymity which made it perfect for criminals to use it for illegal purposes. A significant scandal during those years was the collapse of Mt. Gox, Bitcoin's first and biggest exchange, which at one point handled up to 70% of all Bitcoin transactions.
You buy Bitcoins through an online exchange, and one of the biggest, Mt. Gox, unexpectedly shut down today, owing hundreds of millions of pounds and prompting the sharp fall in the value of the currency.
I had 311 Bitcoins in there, which at the time before this started was worth around $300,000. So it looks like that's disappeared.
And do you think there's been fraud here? I think there's a pretty strong likelihood of that. I think a lot of us have suspected that for quite some time. The fact that they're not talking very openly about what's going on, they deleted all the tweets from their Twitter account yesterday. Something is suspicious and doesn't smell right here.
So Bitcoin is just money, but not as we know it. You can't hold it in your hand like this stuff. It's blips on a screen. And my goodness, the price is volatile. Look.
Bitcoin plunging nearly 14%. Bitcoin is back up about 10% after a volatile weekend.
The volatility is reflective of lots of speculative investment.
At one point, Bitcoin had fallen to just over 3,200, and yet despite the crash, Bitcoin's worth remained in the thousands. And now, only 4 years after the 2018 crash, Bitcoin is worth over $45,000. Why is that? Because there is a growing narrative of Bitcoin as a safe haven asset.
Let's talk about Bitcoin.
Let's talk rocket ships.
Can anything slow down the surge we have seen in Bitcoin?
It's the most popular digital currency on the planet. Bitcoin's made some people real rich real fast, and some major companies are buying in.
The world's richest man now investing $1.5 billion.
What's happening with Bitcoin is that people are increasingly learning that it can be trusted.
Recently, a trend started where publicly traded companies were beginning to convert cash in their treasuries over to Bitcoin as a more robust store of value. Most notably, MicroStrategy, a business analytics company, converted $425 million worth of cash in its treasury to Bitcoin. Shortly after, the payments company Square made a $50 million purchase. Since then, a number of companies have followed suit. The confidence that these companies and their investors have in Bitcoin has given increased merit to the concept of Bitcoin as a store of value and a safe haven asset.
Criminals like it because it's anonymous.
The 30-year-old is accused of running a money laundering syndicate, converting almost $5.5 million of cash into
cryptocurrencies are a particular concern. We really need to examine ways in which we can curtail their use and make sure that anti-money laundering doesn't occur through those channels.
As a result of the lack of regulation and monitoring surrounding crypto like Bitcoin, there is a strong belief that it is the ideal money for criminals. But I think the data speaks for itself on that point. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are pseudonymous, which means that even though your actual details are not visible to everyone, your unique identifier, your public key, will be permanently baked into the blockchain upon making transactions with it. This means that cash transactions are just as criminal as crypto transactions. And I believe this is because it's a misconception that currencies like Bitcoin are anonymous and prone to criminal activity. According to chain analysis, only 0.34% of crypto transactions are criminal, but up to 5 of normal cash transactions are criminal. That shows how secure crypto is. People's faith in Bitcoin as a currency or a store of value is critical to its long-term viability. However, many others believe that the present price of Bitcoin is too low or that it is being artificially inflated.
Only thing is a speculative, self-fulfilling kind of rise, and that rise is driven totally by manipulation.
Overall, it's an interesting world of Bitcoin out there. If you did find this useful, then please do consider sharing it with a friend or family member who could benefit. I would really appreciate it. And for my video on Facebook's metaverse, click here. My name is Nisar. This is Simplicity and Focus. Thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.